The Nintendo Entertainment System was one of the most important consoles in gaming history, as not only was it the system that made Nintendo a household name, but it was also the birthplace of many of their most iconic franchises like Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Kid Icarus, and so on. Despite this, there are a good number of franchises from this era that have seen little to no activity since, yet would have so much potential when it comes to a modern revival. What is going on, everybody? I hope you're all good. It is your host Peter speaking, and for this video, I wanted to talk about some games for the NES that I would like to see a modern reboot of in today's world of gaming. The inspiration behind this video came from me recently revisiting Kid Icarus Uprising on the 3DS, as that game breathed new life into the Kid Icarus universe by introducing many new characters and providing returning faces with newfound personality and charm. And I was thinking about what other neglected games from the NES could get this sort of treatment. And seeing as one of the main criticisms aimed at Nintendo these days seems to be that they rely on the same old franchises time and time again, I thought that reviving some of the classics that we haven't seen in decades could help address that criticism, as it would provide newfound variety in what they have to offer today on top of creating new IPs like Splatoon and ARMS. So, without further ado, let's get into it. These are my most wanted NES revivals. The first one that I want to start off with is one of the NES's most famous titles. Bundled in with the original Super Mario Bros., Duck Hunt was a game that made use of the NES Zapper as you shoot down flying ducks while that annoying dog laughs at you if you miss. It's a very basic game that admittedly in this day and age can get pretty boring quite quickly, but that's why I think it could benefit from being brought back. Rather than just shooting in the same spot, perhaps it could be transformed into a colourful and wacky first-person shooter or a rail shooter that takes the hunter and the dog through a journey of some sort, with all sorts of quirky twists thrown in that would give the game a lot more depth and replay value. An example of what I can compare this to would be the first-person shooter minigames present in Rayman Raving Rabbids, where you can be rewarded more points if you keep your eyes peeled for secrets that will increase your high score, making it all the more replayable. There could be all sorts of settings to explore beyond the hunting ground that we're used to seeing. Maybe we could venture into some deep dark woods or visit a beautiful lake. There's all sorts of places you can find ducks, so why not go absolutely wild with a change of location to make things more interesting? I will admit that this idea sounds as if it wouldn't be worth a full price AAA adventure, but perhaps it could be a smaller title that would suit the eShop at a fraction of the price a lot better due to being smaller in scope, something which will apply to other entries on this list. Here's one that players of the Super Smash Bros. Series should be familiar with. Popo and Nana, collectively known as the Ice Climbers, have been fan favourites ever since their series debut in Melee, but they've only ever starred in one actual game in the form of the 1985 vertical platform title called, well, Ice Climber. In this game, you, as well as a friend if you wanted to go multiplayer, controlled one of the pair as you ascended various mountains by chiselling away at the floors above you to try and reach the condor at the top of the stage, collecting vegetables and dodging enemies and hazards along the way. The thing is, I find Ice Climber to be a game that has aged rather poorly compared to other NES titles, as the jumping feels really clunky, and there have been several occasions where I seem to fall through the ground despite clearly landing on it, which has only ever caused me frustration. But this is exactly why I think it's in need of a second chance. Rather than just being another 2D platformer, how about completely reinventing the game altogether into something that could very well be mistaken for a new IP from Nintendo going forward? Perhaps it could consist of climbing up various mountains that get progressively harder, with emphasis on cooperative multiplayer that is reminiscent to Popo and Nana's fighting style in Smash. Maybe the rope used in their recovery move could be used as a key mechanic, encouraging communication with whoever you're playing it with. Of course, we've got to bring back the old enemies and hazards, as well as add in some new ones. I think there really is a lot of potential for an Ice Climbers revival, and they can use their Smash Bros clout to their advantage to grab everybody's attention in the same way we've seen with the likes of Fire Emblem and Xenoblade Chronicles. This next one will be an odd choice, but I think it could have potential if executed well. Devilwood was a maze game designed by Mr. Shigeru Miyamoto himself, and his first ever console-only game after having worked on arcade titles beforehand. Often referred to as a Pac-Man clone by some, you control a little dragon creature called Tamagon, as you pick up crosses, consuming the dots and avoiding monsters while trying to put up with the devil constantly ordering his minions to move the stage around. A character who you may recognise as an assist trophy in Smash Bros. That would move the stage boundaries around in a similar manner. Devilwood never made a North American release due to its religious imagery, which might hold back its chances of even coming back in the first place, but despite this, I think it would be cool to see it revived with a twist. As I said earlier, It plays similarly to arcade icon Pac-Man, which in the past decade has seen 2 modernised releases in the form of Pac-Man Championship Editions 1 and 2. Maybe a new Devilwood that takes inspiration from these 2 titles could be the way to go to make it all that more refreshing, with new mechanics and flashier presentation to make it all the more worthwhile. At the same time, this could be seen as straight up copying the Championship Editions, but with mechanics like needing the cross for protection and utility, and the moving camera, I think there could be enough room to work with to distinguish itself from this source of inspiration. This next entry will be particularly interesting, as it never saw a release outside of Japan, technically making it a Famicom title rather than the NES, so I'm sort of cheating with this entry if you count them as separate consoles. With that being said, this game was eventually brought to the 3DS Virtual Console worldwide in 2014, and that is none other than the mysterious Murasame Castle. This forgotten title starred the aspiring samurai Takamaru, and played similarly to a classic top-down Zelda adventure where you navigate through different castles to take on the formidable entity known as the Murasame, wielding a trusty katana and armed with shurikens to help you on your way. One idea I had for if this franchise ever saw the light of day again would be that it could be mechanically similar to the 3D Zelda games from before Breath of the Wild's release. Seeing as Breath of the Wild has taken a more open world approach and is likely to be the standard for 3D Zelda games going forward, how about making the mysterious Murasame Castle property have the more linear structure that is more reminiscent of the likes of Ocarina of Time and Skyward Sword, in case there's any fans that preferred the structure in those games, therefore filling a rather unique niche while the actual Zelda can continue with its newfound identity. On paper, I don't think this is the worst idea in the world, as the original game has its similarities to 2D Zeldas anyway, and Takamaru's arsenal could lend itself really well for combat, exploration and puzzle solving. Despite the mysterious Murasame Castle only ever having one entry to its name, Nintendo still seemed to be enthusiastic when it comes to representing its legacy in other titles, as Takamaru has also appeared in the likes of Super Smash Bros. As an assist trophy. He shows up as one of the supporting characters in the Japan exclusive Captain Rainbow for the Wii, and even has his own attraction in Nintendo Land. The last entry for this list is quite possibly the idea I'm most enthusiastic about, which is why I've saved it for last, and that would have to be the action-adventure title StarTropics. Looking back, I think it's safe to say that this was one of the more ambitious titles that Nintendo made for the NES, as it was split up into several chapters, and from my experience, I felt like I was being taken on an adventure. One half of it played like an RPG, where you explored towns to gather information from various NPCs, while the other half played like an action-adventure much like 2D Zeldas, where you fight enemies in dungeons with a yo-yo of all things, and solved puzzles in order to progress. Personally, I think it's quite a shame that we only ever got 2 StarTropics games on the NES despite the potential for growth it could have had in future generations. The quirky characters and settings fit really well with the whimsical charm of Nintendo, and it would be really cool to see it reborn in some way, either as another RPG to join the likes of Pokemon, Mother and Xenoblade, or as another action-adventure that could appeal to Zelda fans. The fact that this series hasn't even seen playable representation in Smash Bros. Could also give a potential reveal much more of a surprising impact, as typically when fans like to discuss what neglected franchises they'd like to see return, they typically look at which retro characters are already playable rather than those who aren't in yet, and in my opinion, StarTropics would be the ideal forgotten franchise that deserves the Kid Icarus Uprising treatment. I also think it's interesting that it was recently referenced in Animal Crossing New Horizons, as Gulliver mentions the island of Coral Cola being one of his many destinations. Could this be a hint? Nah, probably not. I think I'm reading too much into it at this point. Anyway, those were my ideas for my most wanted NES reboots. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what neglected NES games you'd like to see return one day, as well as what new directions you would take them in. Be sure to use your imagination, as I'm curious to see what you can come up with. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, see you later.